The midtown café shimmered beneath golden chandeliers, their light scattering across marble floors as Victoria Hale glided past Daniel Brooks's polite attempt at a handshake. She didn't so much as glance at his hand, lowering herself into her chair with the sharp rhythm of designer heels against stone. Her eyes traveled over him, plain shirt, roughened fingers, the faint trace of engine grease across his cuff. "So you're Daniel," she said, her tone carrying a polished cruelty. A mechanic, the word was sharpened into a dagger, meant to wound and diminish. She couldn't have known that within the hour, the same man she mocked would be the only thing standing between her and catastrophe. Victoria Hale was a woman forged in ambition and fire. At 35, she reigned over Titan Capital, a billion-dollar investment empire known for swallowing rivals whole. Her penthouse pierced the Manhattan skyline, a monument to power and conquest. She woke every morning alone at a dining table long enough to seat 20, her reflection scattered across polished stone until even she couldn't decide which version was real. Just 4 years earlier, she had stood at the altar in a couture gown worth more than some homes, waiting for a groom who emptied their accounts and vanished with his assistant. Before 200 witnesses, she was remade from hopeful bride to a woman who swore never to bleed again. For her, trust was a liability, love, a weakness, and people like Daniel, they were reminders of a self she had buried. Daniel Brooks carried himself with the kind of stillness that didn't invite attention but quietly commanded it. At 36, he had learned long ago that real danger never announced itself with noise or spectacle. It slipped in through silence, in subtle movements, in details others ignored. His hands, rough with scars and permanently marked by years of labor, looked ordinary to most. To him they were reminders of battles fought in deserts and alleys far from the comfort of New York. Hands that once assembled rifles in the dark now repaired engines in dimly lit garages. Hands that once held dying friends now built treehouses sturdy enough to withstand storms for the only person who mattered, his daughter Emma. The faint oil stain on his cuff was not clumsiness but kindness. He had fixed a neighbor's car at dawn so she could make it to her hospital shift on time. What Victoria Hale could not see as she sat across from him was that Daniel still woke at 3:17 a.m., the exact minute his squad had been ambushed in Kandahar. He still mapped Emma's route to school with military precision, noting every corner, every safe exit, every potential danger. The world demanded he return to normal, but his training had fused into his bones. It was no longer a choice, it was survival. When Chloe, their mutual acquaintance, arranged this meeting, she had told Victoria it was a business contact and Daniel that it was about classic car restoration. Neither story was true, but both served as convenient disguises. Sometimes healing required colliding two wounds to see if together they might stop bleeding. Victoria, sipping her overpriced latte as though the act itself was performance art, regarded Daniel with a mixture of disdain and curiosity. She marveled at how simple his life must be. No boardrooms, no hostile takeovers, no consequences larger than whether a machine roared back to life. To her, his existence was a canvas painted in muted greys, unremarkable and uninspired. Her smile was sharp enough to cut through glass as she asked what a man like him thought about while bent over engines, perhaps grocery lists or baseball scores. Daniel recognized the tactic immediately. It was the language of power games, the dance of establishing dominance and measuring weakness. He read her body the way a soldier reads terrain. Her fingers tapped out a rhythm too steady to be casual, betraying medication. Her eyes swept the café in patterns that mirrored his own, mapping exits, analyzing threats. This was not the behavior of a carefree woman but of someone shaped by wounds she had never allowed to heal. Even wrapped in designer labels and armor built from money, trauma left marks he knew by heart. His response was calm, delivered with the even rhythm of a man who did not bluff. Yesterday he had thought about fluid dynamics, how brake fluid behaves under extreme pressure, how entire systems collapse when a single component fails. He had also thought about his daughter's science project on Venus, and the crushing atmospheric weight that would flatten a human in seconds. The look on Victoria's face faltered for the briefest of moments. She had not expected him to resist, not with intellect, not with precision. Her voice came back smooth, masking the stumble, remarking on the obscurity of his thoughts, dismissing them as mundane. She countered with her triumph, a $300 million acquisition that would reshape an industry, the kind of power that bent nations in ways invisible to men like Daniel. He answered without arrogance, only truth. Machines were honest. Break them, and the flaw was visible. Fix them, and they worked again. There was no pretense, no boardroom bloodshed, no lives destroyed in the name of profit margins. His words landed with the subtlety of a knife sliding under armor. Victoria's eyes flashed, sharp and dangerous, insisting she improved lives through capital allocation, a justification honed through years of survival in boardrooms. Daniel did not argue. He had already shifted into something else entirely. While her voice filled the air with tales of Tokyo ventures and pharmaceutical conquests, his eyes were scanning, assessing, cataloging. 3 men had entered minutes before. Their movements were synchronized without appearing connected, their seating triangulated to cover the entire café. Too careful for strangers, too deliberate for coincidence. One near the window touched his ribs too often, checking a concealed weapon. Another by the door carried the hollow gaze of someone who had seen too much, too young. Daniel's muscles tensed imperceptibly, his mind recalculating the café into a battlefield. Distances mapped instantly, 8 feet to the nearest cover, 12 to the kitchen, 15 to the exit. Inventory taken in seconds, ceramic plates, a water pitcher, the tactical pen in his pocket. His breathing shifted into combat rhythm, steady and measured, the old training rising from the depths as naturally as breath. He interrupted her mid-sentence, his tone suddenly carrying authority so sharp it cut through her practiced disdain. He needed to face the door. She laughed with mockery, delighting in calling his caution paranoia, but something in his eyes stilled her. Against every instinct of arrogance she complied, switching seats with him. She made one last barb about his military past, about his inability to cope with civilian life, but the insult hardly reached him. His attention was locked on the leader by the door, whose hand slid inside his jacket with the unmistakable outline of a shoulder holster beneath. Daniel's thumb hovered over his phone, but he knew emergency calls would arrive too late. These men bore the look of desperation mixed with determination, the kind that turned small crimes into fatal ones. His voice dropped low, just enough for her to hear over the hum of the café. Something was about to happen. When it did, she was to move low and left toward the kitchen. No questions, no hesitation, no glances back. Could she do that? Her laugh began on instinct, but it died in her throat. Something primal in his tone told her that this was no game. The waitress balancing a tray of coffees never knew what she walked into. Her foot caught on something invisible, maybe a strap, maybe fate. The tray fell in slow motion, cups exploding across the marble like veins of blood. The man by the window stood too fast, jacket flying open to reveal a Glock, unmistakable to anyone who had stared death in the face. Daniel's hand locked around Victoria's wrist with bruising certainty. The world erupted. 3 guns rose at once, their owners moving with the coordination of men who had rehearsed this nightmare until it lived in their veins. The leader's voice tore across the café, young and unsteady, cracking beneath the weight of borrowed bravado. Everyone on the ground, nobody moves, nobody dies. The pistol aimed skyward looked impossibly heavy in his trembling hands, yet the fear in the room made it feel like the center of gravity itself. Chairs screeched as people collapsed to the floor, gasps turned into sobs. The café, moments before a temple of light and wealth, transformed into a prison of marble and glass. Victoria's mind, once a machine that could dismantle rivals and move millions with a single decision, simply shut down. She was no longer the CEO who devoured markets, but a child again, hiding in a closet while voices screamed downstairs. Her polished armor shattered, leaving only the raw terror she had buried for decades. Her body refused to move, her hands shaking against the floor, her breath coming too fast, too loud. Daniel moved without hesitation. His hand pulled her beneath the table, his frame folding over hers, a shield of flesh and bone interposed between her and the storm. His voice was low, commanding, forged in places where orders were the line between life and death. Stay down. Don't look at them. Don't be memorable. Breathe with me. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. She obeyed, not because she wanted to, but because his presence left no room for refusal. The rhythm of his breath became the metronome of survival. Time slowed, stretching into fragments that revealed truths others missed. Daniel saw the tremor in the youngest gunman's hand, the restless twitch of a man who had never done this before. He noted the track marks up the arm of another, desperation carved into his skin. He watched the leader, eyes burning not with hatred but exhaustion, the kind that belonged to someone crushed under a burden too heavy to carry. These men were not professionals. They were drowning, and their flailing might drag everyone down with them. The addict approached an elderly couple, yanking a purse with such force the woman collapsed, crying out as pain laced through her fragile body. He laughed, high and erratic, pupils pinpricks from chemicals and withdrawal. 6 feet, that was all that separated Daniel from him now. Close enough to smell the sour stench of fear and sweat, close enough to know that hesitation meant blood on the marble. His hand slid around the water pitcher, testing its balance, its weight. The swing was clean, practiced, brutal. The arc ended against the man's temple with a crack that silenced his laugh forever. The gun clattered to the floor as his body followed, twitching once before stillness claimed him. In a motion that seemed effortless, Daniel scooped the weapon, checked the chamber, and claimed it as his own. To the crowd it looked like violence. To him it was simple mechanics, as precise and necessary as tightening a bolt. Victoria's mind reeled. The man she had mocked, the man she dismissed as common, now moved like a phantom pulled from nightmares and war films. His actions were purposeful, efficient, terrifying. Each step, each glance, each decision radiated training she had no vocabulary for. In him there was no hesitation, only calculation. He half lifted her from the floor, carrying her weight as bullets screamed past, tearing the coffee machine into sparks and shards. Her heels slipped on marble, useless ornaments in a war zone. He anchored her against his side, moving them both to the counter where stainless steel offered the illusion of safety. She stared at him, bewildered, realizing for the first time that his scars were not blemishes of failure, but signatures of survival. His voice was quiet, steady, meant more for himself than for her. Leader at 12 o'clock with a hostage, second circling left. His hand caught her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. Listen to me. When I move, you run through the kitchen door. There's an alley. You don't stop. You don't look back. Do you understand? The terror stripped her bare, but she nodded. The boardroom queen was gone. Only a trembling woman remained, her eyes wide, her strength paper-thin. The leader's shout cut through the chaos. Come out, hero, or I start shooting civilians. You've got 5 seconds. His countdown began, each number a hammer against the fragile silence. 5, 4, a child screamed, piercing every heart. Victoria's gaze snapped to the service window, where the leader held a little girl in his grip, the muzzle of his pistol pressed against her temple. Her mother knelt nearby, pleading, broken. The child's body shook so violently, it seemed she might shatter. 3, 2, Daniel's jaw tightened, the war returning to his eyes. The equation of combat sharpened in his mind. Save one, risk many, act too late, lose all. He rose, his voice loud enough to stop the countdown. Wait, I'm coming out. Let the girl go. He placed the gun he had taken on the counter where it could be seen. Not surrendered, but not hidden. His body moved deliberately into view, hands raised, every step a calculated vulnerability. Victoria's breath caught. He was offering himself, bartering his life for a stranger's. The mild mechanic she had ridiculed was gone, replaced by something elemental. The leader swung his weapon toward him, eyes filled not with rage but grief. You killed Marcus, my little brother. He's dead because of you. The words shook with pain deeper than the barrel in his hands. Daniel's voice cut through with certainty. He's not dead. He's concussed, skull fractured maybe, but alive. I know where to hit to drop a man without killing him. He needs help, but he'll live if this ends now. The leader's hand trembled. Up close he was barely more than a boy, perhaps 23, weighed down by debts and fear. His chest heaved with the strain of choices no one should have to make. His comrade shifted by the window, voice tight with panic. Tommy, cops are coming. We've got to go. Shut up, Tommy screamed, his weapon swinging wildly. Just shut up and let me think. Daniel took one careful step forward. I've got a daughter too, 7 years old, Emma. She loves dinosaurs, pancakes and soccer. I know the fear eating you alive right now, the need to protect her no matter the cost. But this path ends in ruin. Let her go. Don't become a monster in your daughter's eyes. The café balanced on a knife's edge. Victoria watched as the air thickened with possibility, her heart pounding with the weight of his words. Slowly the leader's arm faltered, his weapon dropping, his grip loosening around the terrified child. She stumbled free, sprinting to her mother's arms. For the first time Victoria saw the boy behind the gun, a father, desperate, human, but desperation is never predictable. The second man, unable to accept surrender, raised his weapon with lethal intent. Enough talking. The second gunman's shout fractured the fragile calm. His weapon jerked toward Daniel, finger tightening on the trigger, eyes wide with the raw hunger of a man too far gone to turn back. Time bent again, the way it always did before violence, stretching every detail into sharp clarity. Daniel saw the angle of the muzzle, the shallow rise of the man's chest, the twitch in his knuckles that meant a shot was seconds away. Victoria did not think. Her mind, so often calculating mergers and strategies, simply shut down and gave way to something primal. Her hand closed around the nearest object. The red cylinder of a fire extinguisher bolted to the wall, and her body moved before fear could stop it. With all the strength panic and adrenaline could summon, she swung. The extinguisher crashed against the man's skull with a hollow ring that reverberated through the café. His body crumpled, his gun discharging once into the ceiling as sparks rained from broken light fixtures. The shot jolted Tommy from his daze. His grief, his surrender, all vanished into the spiral of desperation. He raised his pistol again, arm shaking, voice cracking with apology. I'm sorry, I can't go to prison. My daughter, she needs me. His finger squeezed the trigger. Daniel lunged. His hand slapped the barrel aside, just as the gun discharged, the bullet shattering glass where moments ago a frightened child had stood. The two men collided, rolling across marble slick with spilled coffee and shards of crystal. Tommy fought with the desperate strength of a drowning man, wild, uncoordinated, clawing at survival. Daniel fought with precision, his movements forged by repetition, honed by necessity. A strike to the wrist made the gun clatter away. An elbow crushed breath from Tommy's lungs. A chokehold tightened just long enough to dim his frantic thrashing before unconsciousness claimed him. Daniel rolled away, chest heaving, shirt slashed by broken glass, blood spreading across his ribs from the graze of a wild shot. He forced himself to his knees, scanning the room with the vigilance of habit. Threats neutralized, hostages alive. The café had fallen into silence broken only by sobs, by the clatter of utensils knocked loose, by the hiss of steam from machines still running. Victoria stood over him, the fire extinguisher still in her hands, her body trembling from the violence of what she had done. Her immaculate outfit was ruined, silk stained and torn, mascara streaked into rivers. yet her eyes blazed with a ferocity she had never known, a fire unshackled from calculation. Daniel looked up at her and exhaled. "I told you to run." Her voice shook but carried a defiant edge. "I've never been good at following orders. Ask anyone." Sirens wailed outside, growing louder, drawing nearer. The cavalry was coming, but Daniel's instincts told him the danger wasn't over until he made it so. He dropped to his knees, hands visible, his posture deliberately non-threatening. Heroes and threats looked the same when adrenaline clouded judgment. He knew too well that survival sometimes depended not on courage but on humility. Police stormed the doors moments later, weapons raised, commands shouted, chaos shifted hands, from criminals to officers, from one authority to another. Daniel's body obeyed automatically, moving with compliance that once again separated life from death. Paramedics followed, flooding the scene with urgency and gauze and clipped voices. Victoria watched as one of them knelt beside him, cutting away the fabric of his shirt to reveal the map of scars etched across his body. Bullet wounds, burns, shrapnel, wounds from battles she could never comprehend. Each mark a story, each scar a moment when he had chosen to stand between danger and someone more vulnerable. Her throat tightened with a shame so sharp it felt like drowning. Hours earlier she had reduced him to calluses and oil stains. Now she saw the truth. Resilience carved into flesh, sacrifice written across every inch of him. The medic's voice was firm. "He needs the hospital. That wound is deeper than he's admitting." Daniel's voice rasped in protest, pale now that adrenaline was fading. "My daughter, Emma, school gets out at 3. I have to." Victoria's voice cut in, firmer than she expected from herself. "I'll handle it." "What school?" "I'll have her picked up." His gaze fixed on her, confusion mingling with pain. This woman who had mocked him, dismissed him, cut him down. Why would she help now? "Because," she whispered, "you bled for strangers. You bled for me. After everything I said, the least I can do is this. Let me." The paramedics lifted him onto a stretcher, his strength finally surrendering to exhaustion. Victoria climbed into the ambulance without asking, her presence beside him no longer arrogance but something else entirely. That night, her penthouse felt different, not like the fortress she had built, but like a mausoleum. The city lights stretched below her, cold and indifferent. She stood surrounded by framed magazine covers, photographs with titans of industry, achievements she had once thought defined her. They looked like relics from a former life. What echoed instead was not the applause of boardrooms, but the moment Daniel offered his life for strangers, the quiet steadiness in his voice as he faced men with guns and turned them into men with choices. Her phone buzzed relentlessly, messages from her executive team demanding statements, reporters asking for comment, her mother inquiring if she had seen the news. She ignored them all. Instead, her eyes fixed on her phone screen, on the contact saved under mechanic, with casual dismissiveness. For the first time, she truly saw what that word had hidden. At the hospital she met Emma, a child with her father's eyes, steady and searching, asking the kind of serious questions only children shaped by hardship could form. Is he going to be okay? Are the bad men gone? Can we still have pancakes on Saturday? Daniel's voice softened as he reassured her, transforming from warrior to father before Victoria's eyes. He was strong in battle, yes, but stronger still in this role, holding his daughter's hand, anchoring her to safety even from a hospital bed. Emma turned to her with innocent curiosity. "Is this the Princess Lady?" Victoria blinked, startled. "Princess Lady? Daddy said he was meeting a princess, someone who lives in a tower and doesn't come down much." Daniel flushed faintly, correcting her. "I said she was successful." Emma frowned with the honesty only children carry. "You said she was sad. Said some people build towers so high they forget how to come down." Victoria's chest tightened. Out of the mouths of children came truths sharper than any boardroom insult. She had built her tower, but today Daniel had pulled her back to earth. The night after the robbery bled into morning with restless hours that refused her sleep. Victoria lay awake in her penthouse, staring at the ceiling as fragments of the café replayed over and over. The sound of shattering cups, the sharp crack of gunfire, the feel of Daniel's hand pulling her down, shielding her without hesitation. Every cruel word she had thrown at him before the chaos now pressed against her chest like iron weights. By dawn, her carefully constructed life, polished floors, glass towers, magazine covers, felt hollow, stripped of meaning. When she finally dressed, it was not in the armor she usually wore, no tailored suit, no heels like weapons. Instead, she slipped into jeans and a sweater she had barely worn, fabric that felt strange against her skin, clothes not for conquering but for existing. She carried coffee in one hand, a small bookstore bag in the other, and made her way to the park Daniel had mentioned in the ambulance when giving Emma's school details. She spotted him on a bench, moving with stiff caution, a bandage taped beneath his shirt where glass had carved into him. His face was pale, but his eyes were anchored to the swings, where Emma's laughter carried into the cool air. Victoria approached with steps uncharacteristically hesitant. She offered the coffee without flourish, placed the book gently in Emma's hands. It was about a knight who invented machines, a blend of courage and cleverness. Emma examined it with her solemn little gaze and announced matter-of-factly that the knight was a girl. The strongest knights sometimes are, Victoria replied, surprising herself. Emma's brow furrowed thoughtfully. Like you with the fire extinguisher. Daddy told me you hit the bad man. Her throat tightened at the memory. Your dad was the brave one. Emma shook her head with certainty. Daddy's always brave, but he said you were brave too, even though you were scared. He said that's the best kind of brave. Daniel shifted on the bench, motioning for Victoria to sit. The space beside him felt different from the café, less hostile, more fragile. She sank down, her heart racing with words she wasn't used to saying. I owe you an apology, for everything. The arrogance, the cruelty. I was protecting myself. His voice was steady, quiet. I knew, from the beginning, the way you kept checking exits, the way you gripped your phone like a lifeline. Something happened to you that made attack feel safer than trust. Her eyes flickered to him, startled. How could he know? His answer was simple. Trauma recognizes trauma. He folded napkins in precise military corners. He checked doors twice before settling. His body was trained to survive even when survival was no longer the battlefield. He saw in her the same instincts shaped by betrayal, rather than war. Words tumbled out of her. The wedding, the man who left, the humiliation that hardened her into something unyielding. She spoke of armor forged in cruelty, of walls so high she forgot they were still made of paper. Daniel listened, then answered with his own truth. Kandahar, lost brothers, pieces of himself left behind in desert sand. His ex-wife trying to love him back into someone who no longer existed. He built a new self from shards, one that could protect but not always connect. The air between them softened, a silence heavy, not with tension but with understanding. They watched Emma pump her legs on the swing, reaching higher, laughing as the wind tangled her hair. For the first time Victoria felt a pang of longing, not for conquest, but for something she had forgotten was possible. Belonging. The days that followed shifted subtly. She found herself drawn back to them, to Daniel's small home with its cluttered kitchen and refrigerator plastered with Emma's drawings. She helped Emma with school projects, listened as the child explained dinosaurs with the seriousness of a scholar. She sat across from Daniel at his worn table, sipping coffee neither of them liked but shared because rituals mattered. The grandeur of her penthouse grew colder with each visit, while his simple apartment felt impossibly warm. One evening she admitted she didn't know how to be part of something small and real. Daniel laughed softly, though pain laced the sound as he pressed a hand to his ribs. Neither do I. I know how to fight, how to protect, how to keep the world at a distance, but this, he gestured between them, this terrifies me more than combat ever did. Why? She asked. His answer cut through her. Because in combat the worst that happens is you die. Here the worst is that Emma gets attached and loses someone again. Or you realize I'm too damaged, too much work and walk away. Her voice was steady, almost fierce. What if I'm just as damaged? What if we're both too much work and that makes us perfect? Because we understand rebuilding. Because we've already lived broken. He stared at her, seeing not the polished CEO who mocked him, but a woman stripped bare, trembling yet unyielding. He kissed her then, not with the fire of conquest, but with the careful question of someone afraid to break fragile hope. It was not passion as she once defined it, but connection, and in its simplicity, it was more powerful than anything she had ever known. Weeks turned into months, their lives entwined in ways neither had expected. She joined him at soccer games, cheering louder than she knew possible, rain boots on feet that once wore only stilettos. She learned to change oil, guided by his scarred hands over hers, feeling machinery come alive under her touch. He sat beside her while she taught Emma about compound interest with a piggy bank, watching the girl's eyes light up with understanding. It wasn't easy, her sharp words still slipped out, his silence sometimes stretched too long, but there was grace in the attempt. Together they searched for a house, settling on a modest one in Brooklyn. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, a yard that needed tending, and a garage that made Daniel's eyes light up like a child's. Emma claimed her purple-painted room, directing where every dinosaur figurine should sit. Victoria found herself laughing, carrying boxes, and realizing she had never been happier hauling cardboard than she had signing multi-million-dollar deals. One evening, as boxes still cluttered the floor and Emma slept upstairs, Victoria joined Daniel on the porch. The city glow barely revealed the stars, but they looked up anyway. "Do you regret any of it?" she asked quietly. He shook his head. "Just thinking about how we had to walk through fire to find this, how your walls and my scars collided in the worst place, and somehow it became the best thing." She leaned against him, feeling the solidity of his presence, and whispered the truth she never thought she'd admit. "I almost let prejudice and fear steal this from me. If you hadn't been patient, if you hadn't seen through me." His answer was simple, steady. "We saved each other. You reminded me there's more to life than survival. I reminded you that strength isn't cruelty, it's love. Time did not heal all wounds, but it gave them room to breathe." 3 months stretched into 6, then a year. Each day a slow layering of new rhythms over old scars. Victoria still ruled her empire, but she no longer mistook cruelty for strength. In the mornings she left her penthouse later, preferring instead the small kitchen where Daniel brewed coffee he didn't even like, where Emma's chatter filled the air, where the refrigerator held drawings instead of financial forecasts. The steel and glass fortress she had once called home became little more than an office with a bed. Real life was found in a Brooklyn house with creaky floors and a garage that smelled of oil and possibility. Emma thrived in the warmth of this patched-together family. She learned her multiplication tables under Victoria's patient guidance, but also absorbed lessons money could never buy. That bravery sometimes meant standing still, that even the strongest nights carried fear with them, that trust was not weakness but a weapon of its own. She told her classmates proudly that her dad had once been a soldier, and her new mum had fought bad guys with a fire extinguisher. Victoria laughed the first time she overheard it, but there was no denying the truth in the child's eyes. She had become more than a visitor in Daniel's world. She had become family. It was not without struggle. Daniel's nightmares still pulled him into darkness some nights, his body thrashing against enemies long buried. Victoria would sit quietly beside him until the storm subsided, touching his shoulder just enough to remind him he was no longer alone. Her own reflexes, sharpened from years of betrayal, sometimes resurfaced in boardrooms where she cut too sharply, where she found herself slipping into the woman who attacked first, so she could never be attacked. Daniel never judged, only reminded her gently that survival habits could be unlearned. Grace lived in the trying, not the perfection. One Saturday morning, Emma's soccer game unfolded under grey skies. The field was muddy, parents huddled under umbrellas, children chasing the ball with the chaotic joy of youth. Victoria cheered the loudest, rain dripping down her hair, boots caked with mud that cost more than most people's rent. Daniel stood beside her, quieter, steady, smiling as Emma kicked the ball the wrong way and celebrated as though she had won the World Cup. It was a small moment, ordinary to anyone else, but for Victoria it felt monumental. She had traded glass towers for sidelines, boardroom victories for muddy cheers, and she had never felt richer. After the game they gathered at a pizza place loud with children and alive with laughter. Victoria helped Emma with a juice box, listening as the girl explained dinosaurs with grave seriousness. Daniel leaned back in his chair, watching them with an expression Victoria had not seen before. It was peace, not the absence of memory or pain, but the presence of something stronger that finally outweighed it. That night, after Emma fell asleep, Daniel brewed coffee neither of them truly wanted, more ritual than refreshment. They stood in the small kitchen, light spilling over clutter and dishes, and Emma's artwork taped to every surface. It felt more sacred than any boardroom Victoria had ever conquered. She set her cup aside, voice trembling with vulnerability she would never have dared years before. "I don't know how to do this, to be part of something so small, so real." Daniel shook his head gently. "Neither do I. I know how to fight, how to protect, how to compartmentalize. But this terrifies me more than anything I've faced. Why? Because in combat, the worst thing that happens is you die. Or you realize I'm too much, too broken, too hard to live with." Victoria crossed to him, placing her hands on his scarred arms. "Then let's both be too much together. Damage doesn't mean unworthy. It means we understand the cost of building again." He kissed her, gentle and careful, not with conquest, but with the fragile bravery of two people choosing to believe they could be more than their scars. Years passed. Seasons changed. The purple room in their Brooklyn home filled with Emma's dinosaurs, then trophies, then books. Victoria's name still graced magazine covers, but now the photographs showed a woman smiling, not from victory, but from peace. Daniel still checked locks 3 times before bed, still sat facing the door at restaurants, still carried the shadows of Kandahar in his sleep. But he laughed more. He healed not by erasing the past, but by learning it didn't have to define the future. On the 5th anniversary of that disastrous blind date, Victoria stood in the garage with hands covered in grease, helping Daniel rebuild an engine while Emma worked on math at the bench. Her once untouchable wardrobe hung upstairs, used now only for meetings, not for armor. She had learned that strength was not hardness, success was not safety, love was not weakness. Emma looked up from her homework, pencil tapping against paper. "Mum, can you help with this?" The word struck Victoria every time. Mum, a name earned not by blood but by choice, by showing up through fear, by building something from ruins. She wiped her hands on a rag and smiled. "After I finish this, your dad's teaching me about combustion." This was their life, ordinary, extraordinary, born from a blind date that should have ended in ridicule, tempered in chaos, rebuilt in the quiet persistence of love. They had learned that families were not always born but built, that damage did not cancel out worth, that sometimes the worst beginnings could lead to the most beautiful lives if you dared to try again. And in a small Brooklyn house with a purple bedroom and a garage that smelled of oil and hope, they had found what neither had believed possible. They had found home. 5 years after that blind date that had begun in mockery and ended in chaos, Victoria stood in the garage, her hands streaked with grease as she leaned over the hood of an old engine beside Daniel. Across the workbench, Emma scribbled through her math homework, Dinosaurs still lined up along the edge like silent supervisors. Upstairs, Victoria's designer suits hung untouched, worn only to meetings where she was still sharp, still commanding, but no longer cruel. She had learned the difference between being strong and being hard, between conquering and truly living. Daniel still checked the locks 3 times every night. He still chose seats with his back against the wall, still woke some nights caught in battles only he could see. But he also laughed more easily now, slept more soundly, and carried the quiet faith that good things could last when you chose to fight for them differently than you fought before. "Mum," Emma called, her voice casual, natural. She had begun calling Victoria that 2 years ago without prompting, the word slipping into their lives like it had always belonged. "Can you help me with this?" Victoria smiled, wiping grease from her fingers. "After I finish this," she answered, glancing at the engine. "Your dad's teaching me combustion." This was their life, ordinary and extraordinary all at once, built not on wealth or perfection, but on the willingness to trust after trust had been shattered, on the courage to stay when running would have been easier. They had discovered that love wasn't the absence of scars, but the presence of grace, that families weren't always born but built, that sometimes the worst first date could become the foundation of the best life, if you were brave enough to try again. And in a modest Brooklyn home with a purple room upstairs and a garage that smelled of oil and possibility, they had found something more valuable than all of Victoria's millions or all of Daniel's medals. They had found home,